I have a confession. When it comes to video games, I have a bad history that I seem doomed to repeat, and the pattern inevitably leads me to one place: the bad ending. I first felt that something was off when I finished Silent Hill. The story left many questions unanswered and the protagonist's fate bleak, but it seemed appropriate for the tone, so I continued on. And at the conclusion of the sequel, I saw the new main character meet an even darker fate. A weird coincidence, but again, seemingly fitting for the genre. But then, later that same year, I played Persona 4, a comparatively light-hearted game. And after some 80 hours, I was eager to see the ending of its convoluted mystery plot. But then, like a bad dream, there came a test, for which I hadn't studied. My character was peppered with a series of questions, and I tried to improvise, but he seemed to slip into a hopeless descent, all the characters resigning themselves to failure and the game ending on a dour note. As the credits rolled, I suspected that there was something amiss, but I was too disheartened to press on. Years later, I played The Witcher 3, and found myself again at the end of a long RPG that had kindly let me press my own take onto the main character's arc, and I was eager to watch him shed a modicum of his world-weary cynicism and pass on a message of hope to the next generation. But then, a dark cloud descended. Something was wrong. Suddenly, his allies began to vanish one by one, and a hard cut to an epilogue found him locked into a grim fate that seemed to appear as if from nowhere. The bad ending. I couldn't handle it anymore, and becoming an adult and getting a real job meant a few years away from gaming. But upon my return, I thought, why not explore some new titles in those favorite genres, like, say, Signalis or Silent Hill F. The bad ending lurks around every corner, and today I ask you, why? Why is this part of our favored medium, and does it serve any purpose other than to intensify our suffering upon this earth? Yes, it does. A few games literally use the terms bad ending and/or good ending in their text, but mostly the terms informally refer to happy endings, where protagonists achieve their goals, or Pyrrhic victories where they don't. So, a jazzed-up version of you win and you lose. But as game narratives have slowly matured, endings have evolved into these complex flow charts. But even a map of layered, variable endings like this often end up getting sorted under the umbrellas of good or bad by fans. And that's the nature of games. Anything that prescribes you a goal is going to either feel like a win or a loss, no matter how much other characters are thrown into the mix. In the best cases, you get a fallout, with many plot lines and individual characters coming to varied fates in accordance with tangible player choices. And in the worst cases, you get a Deus Ex Human Revolution, where all of the cool narrative gets boiled down into a room with 4 buttons. But while Fallout and Deus Ex each have good storytelling in their own way, what interests me are endings themselves that recontextualize the entire story. The kind of ending that makes you want to play the whole game again. Silent Hill is a short game for its genre. Full 3D games with explorable levels and cinematic presentation were fairly new in 1999. This game is closer historically to Donkey Kong than it is to anything from this year, but still it's popular enough that a full-scale remake is in development right now. And I won't summarize the plot to you, but the crux of the game is a ludo-narrative consonance that every good game in the franchise would go on to employ. The plot is simple in content, but mysterious in style. You play a character surrounded by hazy supernatural stuff, and it takes them until the final act to get somewhere close to understanding, even compared to other horror and fantasy stories, which tend to drop a little more foreshadowing along the way. And that kind of narrative direction works when you have a legendary art team taking up the spotlight. And the devs of the first game knew that even their art couldn't carry the whole experience. It's an evocative style, but even 1999 era cave dwellers needed a little more to grab onto than this. Plus, in the late 90s, the dating game craze had been in full swing for a while, so multiple endings were seen as a pragmatic, cost-effective method for developers to get a little bit more narrative interest out of less content. It's weird to compare Silent Hill to a dating game, but hey, Clock Tower also did the same thing a few years prior. And unlike Clock Tower, which let its varied endings play out with no clear indication that there was anything more to experience, Silent Hill goes so far as to explicitly call its endings good or bad, respectively, to cue the player in that there's more to the experience. Looking the player in the face and saying, "You got the bad ending," with no indication of how one might get the good ending, is a pretty bold and risky choice. What saves this from coming off as padding is the fact that Silent Hill itself has no filler. It's clunky and weird to get used to, but after a single playthrough when you've learned the basic layout and control scheme, it's relatively easy to jump back in and finish the game front to back in another maybe 4 or 5 hours. And again, its cinematic presentation gives you just enough cool, ominous imagery to soak in that a second playthrough feels like an opportunity rather than a chore. The bad ending is just a slap on the wrist, and going another round with all the memorable scares and weird monsters makes the good ending feel a little bit more earned than if it had just been scripted. So let's create a typology of bad endings and see if we can organize it into a nice numbered grouping, like 3. And we'll call this first kind Advanced Failure. It's obviously not gratifying to a player of any game to tell them their character failed, but we can see how it works in this context. Because the tone is supernatural and overwhelming, it feels appropriate, not like you screwed up, but that Harry Mason screwed up. And crucially, this is a relatively short game, but how might an ending like this affect a game that was longer, say 10 times longer? Persona 4 is a favorite game of mine, but it is not beyond reproach. If you'd like to hear me sing its praises, here's a nice little video about that. But for now, I'd like to focus on a particular narrative direction choice. Although the plot is an intense murder mystery, the actual gameplay is entirely focused on small character moments. The major story beats just play out for your entertainment, in between all the light action RPG elements. That is until the 80-hour mark, when the game decides it's final exam time. Your characters have a confrontation that's dramatically great, but then the player character has to save the day by choosing a series of dialogue options. You get asked 6 questions, and your possible responses look like this. It's not exactly clear which answer will take everyone's hand off the metaphorical trigger, and maybe there's some element of Japanese language that's lost here, but that seems like a reach because this game's translation is overall stellar, so it'd be really weird for them to beef the climax like this. This moment right here needs to be studied in game design schools. It's nice that the narrative respects your intelligence enough not to just give you the answer, but it's clearly a level of subtlety that this game's simple dialogue system can't convey. It might undermine the tension to just give you some big try again option after this happens, but the inverse is a little too heavy. Rolling the entire credits and making you wait through this 10-minute dour sequence just makes it feel more like the game is actually supposed to end this way. Personally, I would rather suffer a little anticlimax or blow to my gamer pride than just spend a half a decade feeling like this game had a lame ending before reading that there was a good one on the internet. But thankfully, we don't have to pontificate about this much longer because this game is also getting a full-scale remake. Sorry for contributing to the millennial nostalgia-fueled gaming industry, my bad. But it will be interesting to see how a new group of developers recontextualize this moment. And that's not all we'll get to see a new spin on, because this game doesn't just have one bad ending. For you see, its initial success in 2008 meant that they needed to make more of it, but you couldn't do DLC then. You had to cram in enough additional content for another full-blown retail release. But given this game's good ending had explored all the characters so thoroughly and resolved the plot so entirely, if all the characters have done every rational thing they can do to solve a mystery, what else is there? Well, you could have them act irrationally. The Persona 4 Accomplice ending is something I heard about rather than experiencing personally, but it's one of those rare pieces of entertainment that feels engaging even to hear out of context. Role-playing as an evil character is usually not that interesting. It's basically like burning ants with a magnifying glass, and if the game is gonna continuously indulge you, it gets old quickly. But the villain centered in this ending is exactly the kind of guy who would burn ants with a magnifying glass. He is a bona fide edgelord. He has no ideology or even materialistic reasons to do what he does. He doesn't just want to beat your party in a fight so that he can continue to be in power. He actually resents you personally for being happy and wants to beat his angst into you. He's an immature, nihilistic brat, and the other antagonists in the game all follow a similar personality curve to foreshadow him. And this is a good contrast, because every big character moment for the heroes is about them admitting their most embarrassing weaknesses and supporting each other anyway. So, at the climax, when edgy crooked cop Joker wannabe serves as your final boss, it makes the extremely cute, wholesome good ending feel appropriate. So if that ending works so well, why would you bother to tack on another one? Keep in mind, their primary target audience for the re-release was people who had already seen the story through. So this isn't really meant to be a surprise, it's tempting fate. The central mechanic of the game is making and building friendships, so what if you could befriend the bad guy, offering us a stick of lit dynamite and promising that something will happen if we hold it until the final moment? And they do not disappoint, where the original bad ending feels a little lopsided because it tried to cram subtle character beats into a simplistic dialogue system. This ending succeeds because the simplicity of the choices you make hammer home the pure audacity of your actions. Over and over, the game just begs you to stop. Please, do not push this button. So you have to push it. And they start by rewarding us with a great actor hamming it up as a villain.
You actually did it! Do you understand what you just did? You destroyed evidence. That's a crime, you know?
And they managed to sneak an additional twist in there. See, you might have expected this ending to be about embracing evil, cackling as you lit the world on fire for your own amusement. But really, the joke is on you, because the bad guy rewards your loyalty with a backstab. You're not his partner in crime, you're his patsy. He owns you now. Oh, it's silly, but silly in the best possible way. This is what any role-playing gamer enjoys, to push a narrative to its logical limits and get a big theatrical reaction. This type of ending is a risky proposition because it can very easily become embarrassing, cringeworthy even, if executed poorly. Take the bad ending of BioShock, which even the world's edgiest 14-year-old rolled their eyes at. See, being deliberately evil and over-the-top heel requires just the right kind of setting to feel justifiable. You need something that's fantastical, divorced enough from reality that exploring your psychological urges seems like a sane thing to do. And what could be a better playground for moral relativism than... Knights of the Old Republic is a dialogue-driven game, like every game its developers made during their golden age, but at the center of its appeal and lasting success was the realization of a long-desired role-playing opportunity. Prior Star Wars games had allowed for a choice between good and bad endings, but they all had the same limitation, because Star Wars stories are about good's triumph over evil. Every game in the 90s, and even many made later, only had the resources to craft one cinematic narrative that positioned the player as hero, and making them turn evil right at the end is basically just for laughs. A moment of self-indulgence that the narrative never really supports. But BioWare, as lifelong tabletop nerds, fully understood how to write the cackling evil wizard. The bad ending of KOTOR is an enjoyable journey because your character effectively turns the Chosen One role into a weapon. As the only person in the galaxy who can collect the required MacGuffin, your party members are powerless to stop you from microwaving anyone who annoys you along the way. And the silent protagonist part is essential for this too. All of your evil acts are way too petty and ridiculous for anyone to voice them out loud, but picking them and then hearing people cower in terror is reliably hilarious. Compare this to Mass Effect's take on the bad ending, where renegade Commander Shepard always sounds like she's trying a little too hard to be badass, and the only time evil works in those games is when you're being so over the top that it's pure comedy. So while the endings of KOTOR are both fairly predictable to any fan of the genre, the climax is still bold in its execution. Letting you kill off your own party members is still a fairly rare opportunity, and turning the insufferable paladin babysitter into a sneering lackey is a delicious piece of camp. But that's the problem with simple archetypal stories. How do you follow them up? The BioWare writing style, not unlike Persona, has mined all the character arcs so thoroughly that there's nothing more to do with them. So if you worked at Obsidian and a LucasArts producer asked you to make another one of these in a scant 12 months, how would you approach that as a creative writer? Well, you've got to remember, it's 2004. People are tired of the old kid-friendly Star Wars. So you slap My Chemical Romance in your Discman, you hop on the message boards, and you drop this spicy little piece of concept art, just to let all the fans know this ain't their daddy's Star Wars anymore. KOTOR 2 has a notoriously complicated plot, so I'm not even gonna attempt to summarize the whole thing, but here's the interesting element. The tone of this game is an overwhelming sense of doom. It's the usual Star Wars bad guys menacing the good guys, so you presume that you can save the day, but every single time you do something nice, this happens.
Why did you do such a thing? Such kindnesses will mean nothing. His path is set. Giving him what he has not earned is like pouring sand into his hands.
This is your wise mentor, and she is here to tell you that the good ending does not exist.
From a certain point of view, perhaps?
In many RPGs, this might come off as railroading, the writer telling you what you should do, but here it works, because every story has to make you ask some kind of question, make you wonder about something that will eventually be revealed. Usually that means, how will our heroes overcome the danger, but here it means, how did everyone in this Star War become so hopeless? Every single party member introduces themselves in such a way that makes it clear they are hiding something from you. Several don't even give you their names. It's a bit over the top, and if you take a shot every time someone alludes to the incident on Malachor 5, you'll feel like a programmer 10 months into crunch time. But putting this much focus on the backstory got me to finish the game, even with little interest in the actual mechanics. So here's where the spoilers come in. The big reveal is that your character pulled a bit of an Oppenheimer, and in doing so created a cosmic imbalance, so spiritually evil that everyone who witnessed it is bent out of shape. Your evil emperor here is literally a human-shaped black hole devouring life out of mindless hunger. His badass enforcer is unkillable, but in the way that a virus is unkillable, just regenerating against his will and fighting because he has no other life skills. And the scheming mastermind is basically dependent on you to act out any of her actual plans. Kreia here makes a big show of acting prescient, like she's seen so many stories play out that she knows where all of this is gonna end up. And in order to effect positive change in the world, she needs you to go from quest to quest, beating common sense into people. Because in her view, every institution is a corrupt failure that needs to be destroyed, and then, only then, can everyone pull themselves up by their lightsaber straps. But no matter what choices you do make, she will always be disappointed, and in the end, she tries to blow up the world and start it over from scratch like a Final Fantasy villain. So the good and bad ending choice is the usual one between seizing power for yourself or letting it go and hoping the world can heal, but where most Star Wars media portrays the forces of good as so competent that they can subdue bad actors for the rest of the future, this ending feels like the opposite. A major quest in this game convinced me that forcing an entire planet to abandon democracy for fascism was actually the only way to save it from being eaten by the black hole man. Sure, the fascist NPCs were as greedy and stupid as the real thing, but the larger context of the narrative convinced me that waiting for democracy to do the right thing would have actually been too late in context to prevent the ultimate catastrophe. So I ended up doing something that I considered objectively evil for the greater good, which is surprisingly rare in RPGs that are usually keen to let you solve every problem through sufficient patience. And in order to make actual fascism seem justifiable, they have to create a completely fantasy form of unstoppable evil, but that's what makes fantasy a safe space to contemplate the real things that are too heavy to work out in your day-to-day life. And so we reach the third and most mature bad ending, the grim dark variety, conveniently available in 2 flavors, the spooky SCP monster Freddy Fazbear variety for the young adolescent boys, and the stabby knife girl Madoka dating sim yandere for her. It's easy to dismiss all of these grim, dark, edgy endings as pure adolescent popcorn entertainment, but admit it, you have some inner teenage angst that once in a while you need to placate with a little Black Sabbath or Warhammer 40k or the Harry Potter villain / fiction. It's a primal urge that we all need to satisfy. And I laughed it off as dumb 10 years ago, but now that Bear is making 10 times his budget at the box office, and I'm starting to think this might be a serious thing. So could there be a game that neatly rolls all of these possible endings into a single, multifaceted narrative that lets us explore our role as the other half of the story to its full potential? Long Live the Queen is an indie game written and programmed by a single author. It's part of a weird little genre called raising sims that dates back to the 90s that I had never heard of, and if you haven't, you can think of as a kind of visual novel roguelike hybrid where you're supposed to die a lot and see what happens. The setting is a hybrid of magic fantasy and light political intrigue, where your character is constantly surrounded by danger and you have an overwhelming number of options to choose between to influence the story, but you never know what's going to happen until it's too late. So failure-type endings abound. Not only will your character die and get cute bespoke artwork to enhance each of these interactions, but the way that you die will tell you something about the shadowy antagonists that exist everywhere around you. And these failure endings, instead of being binary, are kind of three-dimensional. You can succeed or fail, but also get these partial successes where your character luckily survives something and has to use a totally different skill to extricate herself from the situation. It reminds me a lot of those skill check failures everybody likes in Fallout New Vegas, where failing isn't just a lack of interaction, but an opportunity to characterize yourself as weird or quirky through some piece of humor. The abundance of failure is softened by the cute presentation. It doesn't just feel like a frustrating, unclear game, but the story of a total underdog trying to survive against impossible odds. And unlike games that have more animation and interactivity, loading up a new game only takes seconds, so it's easy to experience different elements of the narrative. And that's good, because failures don't just stop the game, but they give you hints, suggestions of underlying motivations and relationships between side characters that you'll have to invest points in other directions to fully explore. And every time you do so, you'll unlock new elements of the story. You could spend your first few hours with this game feeling like you're nowhere closer to the ending than when you started, but you're constantly uncovering new rocks, new little threads. And with enough persistence and taking a couple of notes, you could easily reach the end credits in under 10 hours. But doing so will likely leave you wondering what happened to that character or that other territory. And armed with the knowledge of how to overcome the critical path, you might go back and deliberately invest points in something seemingly insignificant to find out where that thread goes. And ironically for me, I found that the good ending is the easiest one to get, because if you just placate everyone and rack up as many allies as possible, you're obviously removing a lot of the potential threats. But this might leave you with a narrative resolution that feels a bit wimpy, like everyone else helped carry your kingdom to success while you just stood on the sidelines. And so the bad ending becomes a bigger challenge to shoot for. Case in point, one of the first boss fights that you encounter is against a couple of your rich, spoiled, literally entitled cousins who want you to solve one of their problems for them. And the easiest ways to do it are to sacrifice your own resources in order to bail them out, which works fine. But if you go back and decide to play riskier, you might spite them just to see what happens. And naturally, that's going to lead to them confronting you later on. But if you've built the right skills, you can overcome that danger too. And this leads you down a path that might be closer to evil. But there's multiple types of evil to explore. You could be a purely political schemer, which opens up the dialogue trees to a ludicrous extent, or you could completely forego the RPG player's favorite speech skills and invest totally in magic skills, and become an arcane weapon so unstoppable that anyone who messes with you just gets burned to a crisp. But without spoiling it, your meddling in the forces of nature and becoming a deadly human weapon is naturally going to create pretty societal level unease that you'll have to resolve in a totally different way. So these cover multiple dimensions of Type 2 evil endings where you indulge yourself in a little power fantasy, but what about Type 3? How grim and or dark can you become? Well, if this cute anime princess art style was setting off any Madoka Magica alarm bells in your head, you were right. Because there is indeed an ending of the join the bad guy variety, but with a little extra sauce on this one, because he challenges you to do a spoiler so heinous and perverse that he just kind of laughs and is amused when you actually do it. But it also qualifies as a secret ending, because in order to do the most psychotic things, you can't just choose evil, you have to unlock it. See, if you decide to push yourself and really act cruelly in early parts of the game, you will start to accumulate what I swear are called cruelty points, which, unlike Undertale, are not conveniently shown to you through any part of the game's interface, but you can tell they're happening, because familiar scenes will start to acquire new dialogue choices. See, not only do you have to resolve the major conflicts through warfare and violence, you also have to seek out interpersonal grudges and nurse them to create opportunities to act violently towards individuals purely out of spite. And eventually, with enough dedicated role-playing, you too can act out the over-the-top yandere fantasy that all those 90s visual novels inculcated in your mind as the ultimate reward. This game's lean, snappy progression makes pursuing endings feel like a whole mini-game in itself, and I would say that my bad ending curse has been totally lifted by its beautiful narrative structure. My recent playthrough of Silent Hill F left me feeling initially disappointed by its deliberately forced bad ending. I didn't have the satisfaction of a cleanly tied up narrative that other more linear games could give me, but instead of feeling cheated, I felt like I had the incentive to think about the game more on my own time. And rather than a nice put away on the shelf feeling, I feel that I'll come back to it, maybe months, maybe years from now, but when I experience its other endings, I'll enjoy them as two sides of the same coin. But hey, months? Years? You know, we could always bump that up if you were to, say, subscribe.